Venezuela, Central America, and the Caribbean. His experience ranges from preschool to adult education. He has performed roles in teaching, planning, coordinating, supervising, and creating personalized English programs. He holds a degree in marketing and English language teaching from UTIRDA and Universidad Metropolitana accordingly. He is currently in pursuit of an ELT certificate from the Hunter College, City University of New York, and Middle and High School Language Teaching Program for Universidad del Istmo in Guatemala. His workshop is on assessment and evaluation. Please let's welcome Alfieri Avilán.
Morning. Right, I see lots of empty chairs here. Could you please move forward? So I believe in human touch and human warmth. So let's stay close. Let's sit closer so we can establish ground rules for the presentation. Thank you so very much. All right. Just a few housekeeping announcements before we carry on. I know this seating arrangement is called for January main events, but we're going to try to work as possible with people around. Okay. So in order to establish this setting, this collaborative environment, a few rules. Throughout the presentation, I'll be popping questions. This would be yes, there will be no yes or no. It's difficult to measure yes or no from a large audience. So instead, we'll be using thumbs up. Okay? Yes? Alrighty, there you go. Okay. Second rule, since there is yes, there will be no. Okay? But please, not as Roman arenas. Okay? I like to stay alive for at least a few more years. So yes, no. So if it's yes and no, how would you say it's more or less? Like this. All right. Number two. Whenever I pop a measuring question, there will be not only yes or no, but there will be completely understood. Number one. Yes?
More or less? Nothing. Clear? Clear? Perfect. So it's completely understood, sort of, and go home. Great. The other is your cell phones. You can use your cell phones, you can take pictures, you can take notes, you can use your cell phones for this chat, but please in silence mode. And feel free to ask any questions. I know there is an organization and there's always a Q&A session at the end, but if you feel your question it's imperative and you have this curiosity, please share. Feel free. Just raise your hand. Okay? I know that I'm getting some people here in troubles, but that's what we normally do. Okay. Having established ground rules, let's begin. You already heard my bio, but I'd like to summarize it. I'm a teacher. Okay? I've been a teacher for quite some time now, and one of the greatest things I've done. I have done professionally 2 things that are of critical importance in my career. Number one, obviously being a consultant for Pearson for 14 years now. I don't know if it's my first or second or third marriage, but it's been quite some time now. And I'm very proud of working for Pearson because let me tell you about Pearson a little bit before we start with the topic. One of the things that we do at Pearson is we invest in education. Our business is education. We've been in the market for more than 150 years, and we started, ironically, as a great construction company in the UK. Our father founder, Samuel Pearson, had a lot of money with this business, and then he decided to join the educational business. We've been then moving, and we've been working a lot, and we've been transforming our company into the leading learning company in the world. And we call ourselves the world's largest learning company, because that's what we do. We teachers learn. And the quote that was presented previously, I think it touches everyone's heart and brains, because it's, in order for you to teach, you have to learn, right? So that's what we do in Pearson. So allow me to present you with a short clip to show you what Pearson is nowadays, okay? You might recognize us for the books, but we're more than books. We're a lot more than books. Actually, the books is a small portion that makes ends meet, and it allows us to invest in what we do best, which is education. So could you please?
At Pearson, we're here to help people make progress in their lives through access to better learning. We believe that everyone, whoever they are and wherever they live, should be able to learn and keep learning throughout their whole lives, from home to school, to the workplace, and beyond. Today, the way the world learns is changing. Education is being transformed. It's digital, going global, becoming individual. We're changing too, expanding our focus from educational publisher to the world's learning company. Now is our time to show everyone what we do. Our new logo helps us do that. It features the interrobang, a little-known piece of punctuation that captures the excitement, curiosity, and individuality of learning. It's the symbol of what we really believe learning is about. For some people, learning is the route to a better job or career. For others, it's the key to discovery and knowledge. But for all of us, a love of learning is the doorway to new opportunities and a lifetime of personal fulfillment. Because where learning flourishes, so do people. Pearson.
Right, so that represents who we are. Now, okay. Now, you have a notepad on your goodie bags, right? We're going to be using it a lot, okay? So please take it out, draw a T-chart, and let's begin with the conversation today, which is assessment and evaluation. And we're going to start working with a Think, Pair, Share activity. Who's familiar to Think, Pair, Share? Are you all familiar? Okay, I'll explain it. You have to draw a T-chart. Yes, T-chart. Left column, what you know. Right column, what you learned. So we're going to be using this column through the entire conference. So draw the T-chart on your notepads, please. And individually, for 1 minute, you're going to write down everything you know about assessment, evaluation, and assessment for learning. Clear? Are we clear? Good. For how long? What are you to do? Write everything about assessment, evaluation, and assessment for learning. Okay, time's up. Now, you're going to have plenty of time to write, don't worry. Okay, now, with the person next to you, exchange what you've written and complete your column. The idea here is to absorb as much as we can. So for 1 minute, you're going to talk with the person next to you about the things you wrote on assessment, evaluation, and assessment for learning. 1 minute. Go ahead. Time's up. All right. Okay. Does anybody want to share? What have you got for assessment? Yes.
Okay, we discussed here, and what we have is assessment is all the activities, the strategies you use in the class for formative tasks, and doesn't have a grade. While evaluation measures students' learning and retention, and usually has a grade and is done at the end of a quarter or semester, and assessment for learning looks for independent learning.
Does anybody else want to add? Over there.
Okay, assessment is the way the teachers collect information about the teaching and learning processes. And evaluation is used to determine if the goal of the teaching process were achieved by students. It is measurable. And assessment for teaching, for learning, is student-centered. The most important is the students get the goals, and you need to do the adjustment to get those goals on your students.
Something else? Somebody else over here?
Okay, for assessments, for teachers, it's very important to know the weakness and strengths of the students. This is a formative task. It is done almost always during the class because we have to check our students always, even out of the class. Evaluation is measured, is summative, is based on curriculum and objectives. Assessments for learning the outcomes from the students.
All right, so I guess my job is done now. I can go home now because you know everything there is to know about evaluation and assessment. Beautiful. All right. What are main differences between evaluation and assessment? What do we use summative assessment for? What do we use formative assessment for? And what are the new alternatives in assessment? Authenticity in the assessment? These are the things that we're going to discuss. We'll be looking at these 3 parts right now, and then in the afternoon, we're going to have a big practice time, okay, with assessment for learning. So you're going to be doing the job, and I'll be sitting down enjoying a good Costa Rican coffee. So, let's talk about assessment. You have summarized assessment very well, but what are the specific features of assessment? The first is it is an ongoing process. What does that mean? When does assessment begin? The moment we walk in the classroom. Yes? The moment you ask a diagnostic question. What do we use diagnostic questions for? Come again? Exactly, to make informed instructional decisions. We use diagnostics questions in order to get to know how much our learners know about a topic, if they know something, or if it's time to pack and go. Right? And when we finish the class, when we finish a class, what do? We conduct assessment or assessing questions. The famous wrap up. And we could use, for example, a what, how, and why questions in order to summarize and to check and verify what learners are taking with them. So the process begins the moment we walk into the classroom till they leave. It always happens. There is no specific benchmark. There is no specific or planned moment in the curriculum or in the planning for assessment. Assessment happens at all times. Correct? Secondly, it is formative. Why do we say it's formative? Because it's not graded. Do we grade formative assessment? What's the point of formative assessment? Beautiful. To obtain information. And for us as teachers, not only to obtain information, but to accommodate what we're doing. To change, to adjust, to modify, to improve. And as it was called out there, student-centered. I'm not going to be using the word student. I'd like to use the word learner. What is the difference between a learner and a student? Student, thank you. Student happens in a specific setting. A student comes to school, student is in the classroom. A learner uses all the skills, all the knowledge, and all the capacities through life. And formative assessment helps us do that. Yes? Then, it helps us get information on the progress of learners. It allows us, as you're going to see in a minute, it allows us to pause, go back, remediate, and carry on. The learning process, the teaching process are both involved in the assessment, because it helps me not quantify, but to measure if learners are on the right tracks. So my teaching is affected by the outcomes of the process. So there is a link between these three elements when we talk about assessment. As we said, it helps us accommodate teaching. It allows us to improve learning because we know where the flows are and we attack those flows immediately. We just lead, facilitate, and provide skills, strategies, techniques for learners to improve. And finally, it's obviously learner-centered. Why? Because it's about the learner. Everything we do in the classroom is about the learner. We want learners to improve. We don't want them to fail or flunk. For evaluation, it's always final product oriented. We have to wait until the cycle of learning expires and then we take a measure. It's about scores. And those scores, the nature of scores is this. Scores are by nature judgmental in the sense of judging, in the sense of qualifying. If your score is 100 and that's the highest rate, you're supposed to be excellent. That's judgmental, correct? But if you're a 50, you're not that good. If you're down below 50, you should stay home. That's judgmental. Scores have this little detail and they bring in this nature to the learning process. However, scores do not reflect the entire reality of the learning process. They are part of the system, and we've got to cope with the system. And we need those scores. We need a measure to say, you pass, you don't pass. But there is much more to it. We can't just corner the learning process into excellent, good, satisfactory, needs revision, or needs improvement. Correct? So that's what we're going to be looking at. What can we do in the classroom efficiently to help improve those scores and to actually measure real progress of learners? Yes? So, talking about scores and speaking about numbers, what is summative assessment? How is it reflected in the learning process? If you see this diagram here, it represents what we do, what we normally do in the classroom. We have a diagnostic test. Yes? Then we end, I don't know, a semester, a quarter, whatever teaching period takes place. And then, in the middle of the year, boom, an exam. And then we continue with the content as it's planned in the curriculum, because the problem is we have to cover content. It's a must, and we have to advance. And then my learners have paid for a book, and they have to finish the last letter on the corner of the last page of the book. So we take another exam at the end of the year. And what do we get out of that? What do you get out of exams? Numbers. Data is good. Okay? When we play with data, it's good. But it's not everything. Numbers are not justifying the learning process. A number does not tell me you are communicatively competent. And what do we seek? What is it that we are here for? What's our ultimate job as English teachers? Exactly. They have to succeed. And thank you, and life. Thank you. You brought two excellent words. Success and life. It happens that, yes, we work for schools, we work for educational institutions, and we need to present numbers. Perfect. But the end product, the exit product, what happens? Are they competent? Can they communicate? Our ultimate goal is to teach learners to communicate. Yes or no? It's not only a number at the end of the period. It's for them to be able to speak, to communicate in the target language. That is the basis of 21st century learning. English is a life skill, it's not a subject at school that they can either pass or flunk. Yes, there is the system, and we have to go with the system, but there is much more behind these concepts. Yes? So summative assessment is part of the equation, is not the solution to the equation. Formative assessment, on the other hand, it's exactly, correctly connected to our aim, to our objectives, to our goals. It's a process. Communication is a process, isn't it? Yes? Okay. So if we are going to measure a process, can numbers help us? Only numbers help us assess the process? Not definitely. So formative assessment, it's part of the equation. It's a combination of both because of the system. Again, we're coping with a system that requires us teachers to provide data, numbers. But in the classroom, what happens during the lesson should be focused on this. Why? Because it can happen anytime. At the beginning of the lesson, in the middle of the lesson, 10 minutes after the beginning of the lesson, 4 minutes before you end your lesson, and it allows you to stop at a specific moment and say, wait, red flag, something's going on, we need to go back. And then you pause. Once you pause, you take proper measures, you remediate, you apply specific skills, strategies, you revise content, and then you remeasure, make sure everything is understood, and then you can move forward. That's formative. Formative assessment is like learning to ride a bicycle. The first moment you stand on the bicycle, you start moving forward and then you fall down. Yes? Yes or no? Of course, well, some of us. Then you fall down. What happens then? You get back up and you say, okay, what did I do? Where did I go wrong? And then you assess. And then you go back. After you have realized and after you have become aware of your mistake, of what you've done incorrectly, and then you try again. There is a chance for you to improve higher than just getting back up and moving forward. It's a reflective process. Assessment is a reflective process. It's teacher-led, but it's a reflective process. Why teacher-led? Because we provide the skills, we provide the strategies. Formative assessment is not just to stop and say, oh, you made a mistake. This is the correct form. No, we don't do that. Actually, we should not provide answers in the classroom. Instead, we should provide feedback that elicits higher order thinking skills. Essential questions. What is an essential question? What is a smart question? Smart question is the type of questions that allows me to dig down in my black box, connect the dots, and then provide an answer. That's building of information. If I'm to make a question, and this is what regularly happens in a classroom. You're reading a text, for example, and the text explains explicitly there is a red car. And what's the type of questions that sometimes are made in the question? What color is the car? And what's the answer? Red. Is that communication? Are you actually having learners think? They are just obtaining the information from the text. Yes? Those are text-based questions. So we need to change this type of questions in the classroom. Again, another example. Can birds fly? Can birds fly? Yes or no or some of them. Not all of them. End of conversation. But what if, the what if questions, I love what if. What if you ask and change the question to, what in your opinion help birds fly? Oh, I've got to make a pause and think. What are the possibilities? What makes a bird fly? And then you start looking at the learner's eyes and they start jumping. Because they're looking for information. I don't know. If you can make this happen in your classroom, they're using the black box. That's thinking. Okay? Then you need to push them a bit. Not out of the window, but you need to push them to start connecting the information they've got in order to communicate. That type of question helps us with formative assessment. It's an alternative. It's not the key, it's not the solution, but it allows me to identify struggling areas. We take a grammar exam, and then we grade the grammar exam. 100 points, 200 points, 1,000 points. And then you create an interview, and the learner is absolutely quiet, looking at you like something out of this world. What do you do with that 1,000 numbers? right? So there has to be a combination of things. Then we change the grammar test or the grammar quiz for an interaction in which learners need to use the grammar objective. That's different. Oh, we're talking, we're using the conversation model, and then she says she don't have a car. And me, teacher, takes note of it. Okay, on a piece of paper, on a notepad that I carry in my pocket, on the blackboard, okay, on my cell phone, you name it. And then you sit down and provide the feedback. Can you check this sentence again? She don't have a car. Do you think that's correct? Yes. What do you say? No, it's not. What happens? What's the correct form? We elicit feedback that is logical, that requires HOTS or higher order thinking skills. That is the idea of formative assessment. That's the core of formative assessment. Yes? And we've been discussing about tests, which we need to use. How many of you use tests in your classrooms? Raise your hands. The rest? No tests? Test is the widely most used tool for assessing, yes, or for evaluating. They're useful, but be careful. What does a test need in order to be a reliable source of information for us as teachers? The qualities of a good test. The first one is transparency. Transparency represents the clarity of the test. When you make a test, and then you start, let's suppose, and let's bring up the grammar example again. You're measuring the present perfect. And then you start combining present perfect with past tense for a contrast. Does it look like a test? Is it what you are actually going to measure? What's your interest? Is it past tense or present perfect, or the combination of both? Is it completely clear for the learner when he sits down and he's going to start the test? The instructions are clear. The other thing about the transparency of the test, do you train your learners in test-taking skills? Because it's not about the content alone. It's about how to cope with answering questions in a test. Do we take the time? Do we have this in the classroom? And we use the timer and a short alarm that goes off after every section of the test. One thing about the test is that since learners have been working with tests ever since they were born, the learners are born, they enter school, and they're given a pencil and a test. And then we assume they develop test-taking skills by nature. No, that's just embedded into the system, don't worry, just flip the switch. No, we can't afford to assume anything in learning and teaching. So we do give them test-taking skills. The validity, when we are working on the test, and then you start working on the questions of the present perfect, and they say, I'm going to drop a little surprise. Present perfect continues. And they've never seen it. Ha! I'm going to challenge them. Well, that test has already lost the validity. because it's not measuring something that you haven't taught. Period. When we talk about the criteria validity or the criterion validity, when you design the test, test A and test B, the results should reflect the reality of both type of tests. So if your learner takes test A and it gets 100, he or she should have 100 with a test type B. If not, something's going on with the test. So we need to recheck the type of tests, the variety on the tests. So a test should be true to what you teach in the classroom. Not only about content, but about skills, about performance. Then, reliability. The reliability on the test depends on many factors, on many elements. Number one, test marker. We're marking the test, and then you very objectively say, oh, she knows it, but she wasn't feeling well this day. 100. Completely and entirely true. The validity of the test is gone. The subjectivity of human touch in marking the test is one of the causes of the little reliability of paper tests, for example. The other is learners. Are they prepared? Do they feel well that day? You're conducting a listening exercise during recess time, and preschool is out there playing. The little ones are playing, and this is the classroom, and they're here outside, and then you play the tape recorder or the iPod or whatever means of audio. And then, before kids leave, you pause it. Answer the questions. What happens? There is no reliability on that exercise. So there are things that we need to consider to implement before we start running the tests. Number one, do not ever assume learners, even though they're familiar to tests, do not assume they know test-taking skills. Provide test-taking skills strategies. Timing. Just a quick question. How many of you train TOEFL learners? Does anybody work with TOEFL here? I'll tell you something that has to do with test-taking skills. This exam, TOEFL, is very peculiar. It's a 4-hour length test. 4 hours. And you go to TOEFL courses and everybody's worried sick about teaching the skills. And then the person comes in for the test day, and then they start trembling, shaking, sweating, because they don't know it's a 4-hour length. They didn't have breakfast, and actually I administered the TOEFL for some time back home, and I had one student, one learner, who fainted because she didn't have breakfast before going to the test. Now, what is the reliability of that result? And this is just a few examples on what things we need to think of before we run the test. So tests, even though we use them very frequently, it's not just something that we take for granted. Okay? But what more? Who knows that term? Who's familiar to the washback effect? What is washback? Feedback. Anybody else? What you get? Okay, so it would be something like the analysis of the results, what you obtain in the end. Okay? Anybody else? Okay. Right, so it's remediation, what you obtain. The washback effect has to do with the process of teaching and learning, and this has got to do with evaluation. Washback is the true reflection of what is being taught on the test. The closer you are to represent the content, the skills, the knowledge that you have taught in your classroom, the better the results you're going to obtain with a tool, with an evaluation tool. So what does that mean? It means that you taught the past tense, and then you used biographies, short biographies of important characters in history. Yes? Very, very particular. Past tense, characters, short biographies, history. Yes? And then, during the exam, you ask a question of what is the impact of this character in our future? What? Excuse me? Okay, that is negative washback. Why? Because as you said, as you previously mentioned, it has to do with the result. What do I obtain out of these type of exercises? Yes, you do get something. Confusion. You get puzzled. You get all what? Who's this? What is this for? Then you get what you teach in your classroom, and then you teach reading skills because you taught skim, the historical facts, the characters, and the past tense. And then in your exam, you ask your learners to select one of the previously discussed characters and write a short composition on the life of this person. Read the text and summarize, skim or scan. That is positive washback, because that's exactly what you taught in your classroom. So the washback, what the learner obtains is a reinforcement of what is being previously taught. And all in all, it's fair. And the plus on this is that when learners get their results and they come to you for feedback, they won't be able to say, this is something that you didn't teach me. I didn't know this. I've never seen this in my life. This is the first time. No, because it's been taught. And you're making sure that it's been taught. For the past 2 weeks, we've been studying history, characters from the history, and their, impact in our society. We've been practicing the skimming and scanning strategies in such and such exercise. So one thing that we need to pay close attention to is the washback effect on evaluation. True reflection of what is presented on or during the lessons. And no surprises in the test. Okay? No surprises mean something they don't know. You can carry on and add bonus questions or extra credit questions. But as long as they are strictly related to what they've been learning previously. Right? Yes or no? Good. Questions until now? Not for the moment? Okay, here.
Okay, but what happens if if the learners are at a certain level in which they are supposed to know some kind of information related to the topic, and then you make a question in a test, and they say, "I don't remember." For example, I had this experience with my students, and I wrote down something like second graders. Every morning, you wake up and you go to the, for example, school. And they were like, "I don't know what is morning. I didn't include it in the topics for the exam." And I say, "Come on, guys. Every morning we say good morning, and I see that you say that to the grammar teacher. I am a reading teacher. So I'm telling them, what is good morning? You say good morning every day, like please tell me that you don't say it as robots, that you know what it means." They were like, they were confused, but then when you have explained this, I was like, well, maybe I'm making a mistake, but I will have that, if you can clear that for me.
I think you've provided yourself the answer. For one thing, you're making sure that the word, in this case, the word morning appears everywhere. Yes? One thing is what we do and making sure that we teach what we need to teach. The other thing has to do with memory. Learners don't remember what they do days before. You ask, have you got children of your own? Okay, don't you ask them, what did you do yesterday? Those are two separate topics. What happens here is that we need to make stronger brain connections to certain elements. So instead of just saying good morning, bring a picture of the sun and say good morning. For example, yes? And sing a song about the morning and contrast it to the night. Okay? So you can create stronger connections and they can recall these elements. And one more thing, and now that we talk about memory, memory has 3 levels. Okay, short-term store, which there is a lot of people say that lasts 15 seconds, 20 seconds, 27 seconds, 12 and a half seconds. It is short. It's a short period of time. And you hold up to 7 elements at a time. And then you need to move to the second memory, which is a working memory. So bring a picture, sing a song, multiple intelligence, learning styles, working memory. So we create connections in the brain and then recycle that every week or every 2 weeks so you keep it fresh. So it moves to the long-term memory. See? So that's a different approach. It's a different idea. You're making sure that you are evaluating what you teach. Positive washback. Something different, memory. Right? So it's just memory gym. Mm-hmm. No, we don't. Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah, you need to start your lesson what you previously taught. So you keep the message always clean and clear. Okay? And everything needs to have a connection. When we learn languages, we need to make connections, brain connections. Mhm. Right. Right. I know that numbers do matter, of course they do, but we need to pay close attention to what happens in the classroom every day. It's more important for you to make sure that they communicate, that they learn, and that you can actually measure those little things. When the learner goes and say the next day, good morning, and he understands it's morning, then you are super yes. He knows it now. Rather than, oh, he didn't say good morning and the checklist appears and a cross mark, and then you say 50. You need a combination. Obviously, we need the numbers, and that's why I mentioned very emphatically that we have to cope with the numbers. But it's more important when we focus on formative assessment, when we focus on the day-to-day, day in and day out situations in which they demonstrate that they can't communicate, and what we need to do in order for them to communicate, right? Now, let's make a pause and let's remediate. Talking about formative assessment. On your notepads, on your T-chart, remember your T-chart? Take 1 minute and write down what you have learned. Summarize it in 1 minute. Clear? Thumbs up or thumbs down? Right, okay, 1 minute. Okay, time up. I know I'm very cheap with time, but time is not on our side. You know that our first enemy as teachers is time. But we have to cope with time. So what you're going to do next, find someone or find other people, yes, the more the merrier, and exchange what you've learned, okay, and complement what you have written. 1 minute, as many people as possible right there, and extend your info. Clear? Okay, go ahead, 1 minute. Okay, time up. All right. Hold your T-chart there and keep it at all times with you, okay? This is what you're taking with you after the conference, right? This, what we're doing now, it's formative assessment. It's the basis of formative assessment, right? Now, but it's not, what do we use now for formative assessment? What has changed apart from the tests and exams? Tests and exams were challenged back in the 1990s, okay? And it was said, okay, this does not reflect the reality of language learning. Because you can have someone who can write perfectly well, and then you grade that person on writing, beautiful, but when it's the speaking moment, what happens? Yes? So those numbers still did not reflect the reality. So they were challenged in the 1990s, and it was said, we need to change the tune here. We need something new. We need something different. So alternatives in assessment or alternative assessment concept was born. And the alternative assessment concept was born in order to challenge the standardized numbers that were results of tests, which did not reflect reality. One common mistake that I say, and I've seen it one too many times across the region, is that, for example, standardized tests are used to measure linguistic competencies. So you take a TOEIC or a TOEFL or an IELTS test, and then you say, you are a C2 times 10. You're a 565.2. So what? What does that mean? Standardized numbers do not reflect linguistic competencies. Yes? So we started, or the language learning started creating a process of alternative assessment, what we know now as other instruments that are performance-based. When we communicate, we need to do something, yes, other than write and select. We need to analyze, we need to build knowledge, and we have to construct responses. So we started moving towards performance-based assessment. Look at this. Communication is a very complex process, right? So I can't communicate with a single use of a word. Instead of saying, would you like some water? Which is perfectly understandable. I can say, water? I am performing. And my speech has been reduced to the proper intonation combined with a word. That is performance. And my performance carries out a message. Now, is my message clear? Was it clearly stated? Was it clearly understood? You don't, if I ask you for water, that's a message. Formality of the message is different. And there is the other aspect of communication, because I can go to, I don't know, with the reunion of the president and say, "Agüita, pana?" No, I can't do that. Right? So I have to raise the level of formality. Oh, that's different. But the message is still the same. Okay? And that's performance. And for me to assess that performance, I can't do it with a multiple choice question. I can't narrow it down to a yes-no question. I need other forms of assessment. Yes? So I need a rubric, for example. Yes? I need to comprehend, understand what's going on. So I can't just go, yes, no, 220. How do I measure that? If it's performance, okay? So what is performance-based assessment? The first key to PBA is the constructions of responses. It's not just the selection of the response, it's the construction, the building of something, okay? Secondly, I need to engage learners in HOTS, again, higher order thinking skills, rather than, do you understand? What did I say? And that's what happens. The type of questions that we do every day, we just corner learners and say, do you understand what I'm saying? What did I say? That's different. Rather than settling for the yes or no, or just for the face of, then you ask learners to repeat or to paraphrase what you've said. Exactly. So you can say, at some point you say, so he knows. I can carry on. Or, whoa. You know one thing, and this is something that we do in formative assessment, is that we teachers are great at observing. We're the greatest observers of all. And we have this tool, which is called face meter. Do you know what a face meter is? You look at someone, you look one of your learners, and you say, this one here is getting every single word I'm saying. And then you turn and you say, ooh, you're lost. Just by the look on the face. But that's not enough. Okay? So we need more formal instruments, and we're going to jump into it. So when we do that, we need to engage learners in the providing of feedback, of real feedback that comes in with genuine communication. So don't settle for yes, no. Go further, go beyond, and make them respond, paraphrase, summarize, synthesize. Yes? Then, the type of tasks that are called in PBA should be meaningful. How many of you here are fans of the World Cup? Who's following the World Cup? Raise your hand. See? Imagine if I have roughly a 60% of people here who's following the World Cup. There is a 20% who, yes, and there is another 20% that definitely, I don't care. So, what do I do if I pass on an exam saying, who was the last winner of? I have to measure that, and I have to try to combine and measure my audience and create something meaningful. If I do that in my assessment, if I create a task. Now let's talk about football. Okay, 60%, yeah, 20%, and 20%, oh my God. Okay, is that authentic? Is that meaningful? No. So when I'm going to engage in a task, and what is the difference, and here brackets, what's the difference between task and activity. In tasks I need to do, I perform. I have to achieve something through an ongoing process. So I have to think, I have to create, and then I have to give a result. An activity, paper-based, completion, reading, yes? But a task, I can use content and then perform. So if a task is meaningful, the task requires learners to think, to make an effort, and then to try to give a proper response. So I can make a connection and say, ooh, I learned something new. At least, good morning. At least, okay? In PBA, tasks call for the integration of the 4 skills. When we communicate, we necessarily need to use the input that is in the black box and transform it into output. So a task is something that I use my knowledge and then I produce something. So I am integrating listening or reading with speaking or writing. So receptive, productive. We can't just use one single isolated skill. Read and then comprehension questions. What was the color of the car? Red. I'm not producing anything. What if the car was blue? What would have happened? Oh, I'm thinking. Yes? I'm responding and building. Bingo. So I read, I use my black box, and then create another story similar to this and use the following elements. I'm building. Yes? It's completely different. Now, processes and products are assessed. It's not only the content, but how I use the content. Is the person respecting the 5-step writing process, for example? So I can check on that. It's a process. And then the final product is the composition, okay, based on these standards. Beautiful. So the other thing about performance-based assessment is the sort of assessment process per se. There is a 3-dimension process in the assessment. There is self-assessment, me, myself, and I. That helps me create awareness on the learning process. But self-assessment is not only the option here. Did you notice that when you are in your yourself time writing on the T-chart, you have to exchange with someone? Peer assessment. Why? Because, analogy, if I told you here, I can't speak Japanese, what would you say to that? Exactly. Show me the money. I can speak Japanese. So what? Show me the money. Show me you can't speak Japanese. Okay, so I go with a peer, and then I show off saying a few things in Japanese. Right? Peer assessment. And then teacher is paying attention, close attention. Okay, this is okay. And over here. Or direct questions to the entire audience to make sure that everything is going okay. So it's a 3-dimension process. Self, co, hetero. And this should happen every single session. We can't just use the face meter. Okay? Then, the tools for the assessment. Rubrics were brought up here. We've got, for example, rubrics, observations, interviews, journals, portfolios. And these are the alternatives, the new alternatives in assessment. because we've been using these for quite some time now. But there are certain things that we need to know about these tools. The first one, we do these every day. We observe every day. Correct? But observation can be deliberate, so we can plan using a rubric and a checklist. Yes? And we can have learners working on their tasks, and what we do is that we just move around, making sure that communication is taking place and what things need to be improved. Or we can just check it out. I had a teacher, and he always carried in his pocket a short notepad, a small notepad, and he would take short notes through the lesson. We were interacting and he was taking notes. And then after the period or the following day, he would sit down with you and say, we were discussing this and you said this or that. What do you make of it? Oh, I can't remember. Well, the scenario was this, this, and that. Why? Because when we are going to give feedback, we need to be specific and thorough on what we're saying. We can just say, I remember you were saying something like, oh no, it wasn't you, it was my first student at 7 o'clock, and you are the 2 o'clock student. How many learners do you deal with? Don't tell me, just make your numbers. Your brain is already packed, full, it's overloaded. So you need to take notes. Simple and plain, okay? So you can make your observations accurate. Then, there's the interview. Again, an interview can be deliberate. You plan the questions, but not yes, no questions only, but smart questions where you elicit feedback, real feedback, okay? Or to just pop and say, how are you?
I'm good, thanks.
What's your name?
You're Lenny.
Come again?
You're Lenny.
See, this is an interview. It's just as simple as stopping by and talk to one of your learners. Remember what we talked about yesterday? What was it about? What was the topic about? And what did you learn? Did you learn anything? And that's it. A very informal type of interview. And this should happen very often. Exactly. Dice, ay, ahí viene otra vez a hacerme preguntas locas. And so you keep them on their toes. Yes? Okay. Then we've got the checklists. Okay? And checklists are great for showing presence of elements. One thing that I recommend teachers, and they say, what? It's to use a rubric with a checklist. Because when you are performing and you're speaking or you are writing, you need to make sure that certain elements are in that process. So for example, combining with vocabulary. I read many times in a rubric, uses the correct vocabulary of the topic. What is the correct vocabulary of the topic? The one on the book, the one that I presented, the combination of both. Make it short. Make a checklist that represents and that shows learners the minimum required vocabulary they need to use for the interview. And you go check, 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 check. Use morning. Yay! Grammar. The use of the grammar is acceptable. What is acceptable to you? And what grammar, for God's sake? Yes? Exactly. So it has to be, and this is something that we're going to be discussing for rubrics also. So, your learning objectives. Are they standards? Do they come from, I don't know, the Common Core? Are they from the Sefer? Do you create your own? If so, let me know so we can make business in Pearson. So, there are other ways to assess, but one thing about rubrics that we use so frequently, these instruments in the end are not only for the teacher. They're meant to be for the learners, for them to understand what's going on. Be careful with the drafting of your own rubrics. The amount of bands in your rubric, 7 bands in a rubric, everybody drowns. And then the highest level, the medium level or level number 22 in the rubric states something like message almost hardly comprehensible. Huh? What in heavens is that? Or acceptable. What is acceptable? What is satisfactory? Be careful with the drafting of the rubrics. And secondly, sit down with the learner and revise the rubric before you use it. Discuss the levels. What is comprehensible? Comprehensible means this, and that. If you're going to use that word, which I wouldn't. The other thing is that the specificity on the type of verbs and vocabulary used in the rubrics. Do they understand? Try to avoid adjectives such as excellent. It's too broad, too ample. Level of communication is excellent. All right? So let's be careful and try and one of the things about this instrument is the subjectivity, the nature of subjectivity. Oh, I like him. He's very good in my class. He's very cooperative, but he doesn't speak. So that's the issue. So try to narrow down that gap by supporting a rubric, for example, with a checklist. So you're absolutely true of the elements that are being used, especially because we teach grammar, because we teach vocabulary. Okay, so those little presences are the grammar, verb tenses, adjectives, phrasal verbs, comprehension of language, of idiomatic expressions. Portfolios, time-consuming, but very worth it trying.
You know, it's funny when kids learn how to use also rubrics, when they learn how to interpret them. Because I remember one student, he was doing a short exam with me, and the rubric allows him to make 2 mistakes in pronunciation. So when he noticed that he made a mistake, he told me, oh, well, I still have the 100 because I made a mistake, and according to the rubric, I can make 2 mistakes. so sometimes it's fun. So.
Yeah, it does create a lot of self-awareness. Rubrics have a great impact, but there are certain flows in the rubric that we need to pay attention to. Okay? Then, portfolios, as I was saying, very time-consuming. There is a lot of dedication here, a lot of evidence to provide, okay? And time to sit down with the learner and discuss the portfolio. Portfolio is not just a collection of activities and papers, okay? A portfolio needs to be supported by rubrics, checklists, journals, for example. So, because it's a process, they're beautiful because they can show learners the progress. They started the journey in point A, now they're in point G. Perfect. How did you get there? How have you felt? What have you accomplished? What have you done? What would you do differently this time? Yes? And actually, the acronym portfolio, there is a new acronym for portfolios that was provided by Gottlieb, the cradle. These are the attributes of an efficient portfolio. There is the first C, there is a collection of learners' experiences. So when the journal here is great, okay? Secondly, it needs to be reflective. That's why we need different instruments in the portfolio for the assessment. The assessment per se has to be of quality. What is it exactly you're looking into? What do you want your learners to achieve by sitting down with you and discuss the portfolio? Documents. How many documents are you going to introduce in the portfolio? How many documents are going to be backed up by the instrument? So the amount of documents that show and represent the progress are very important in a portfolio. The portfolio is also a link between learners, teachers, community, parents, coordinators, principals, headmasters, everyone. Because it's a document that represents progress, that shows progress. So it's a conversation. That portfolio, it's a living conversation. Okay? And then the evaluation of progress. How is progress demonstrated in the portfolio? How do you have that conversation about progress with your learners? The thing about portfolios, as I said, is time-consuming, but they need a conversation. There's an implicit necessity of conversation with the use of portfolios. Portfolios are not just folders full of paperwork. And here, in the end of the term, here's your portfolio. So what do I do with all these papers? I throw them away because I'm going to the next level? No, the portfolio is handed in and is discussed. And learners would write something about that in the end, because it's a reflective process. I started with learning the verb to be, now I can talk about past events. Oh my God, I'm improving, I'm learning something. Correct? Yes? Good. Everything that has been said is true, but there is something else that we need to discuss, and it's the authenticity of the assessment. Just because it's formative assessment does not mean it's authentic. So let's be careful, because there is a gap also of subjectivity in the assessment, okay? An authentic assessment is designed to elicit performances and products. And what happens with this? They should reflect the reality outside the classroom. Authentic assessment is a type of assessment that tells learners learners know that they can produce beyond the actual classroom or the necessities they have of education. Remember something, English is a life skill. English is something that they can use for pleasure, for traveling, for getting a better job, for furthering their careers. So English is not just, even if you're at school, English is not just to pass a subject or to continue your courses in the institution. English can be there for the rest of their lives. So that reality outside the classroom needs to be brought in and used in the assessment. So the repetition of a dialogue, the memorization of a dialogue, does not reflect reality of assessment. But the inclusion of another person with other words, with another intention in a conversation model reflects the ambiguity and the complexity of communication, the real communication. So what are the features of authentic assessment? Tasks, settings, outcomes, and evaluations. The tasks, again, I'm not going to have my learners repeat a dialogue. What happens when learners memorize dialogues? They just reproduce it. Bingo. They go like this: good morning, how are you? Fine, thank you. And you? Fine, thank you. And they memorize it. They repeat it 1,000 times. And then another teacher comes in and say, hey, how's it going? And I walk away. That task has not authenticity whatsoever. Okay? So the task should reflect the complexity and real world situations. If you're working with past tense events, for example, past events, learners say, why do I care about the past? Why do I have to learn about someone who's already buried 6 feet under? And then you say, because these people have changed the world and this is the impact they have created in the world. That makes sense. If Steve Jobs were not that, picky with inventing things in a garage, we would never have the iPod or the iPhone and the tablets and so on and so forth. So these are the kind of things, the tasks and the settings that learners need in authentic assessment. Also, outcomes, the outcomes that we establish. The learning objectives, are they achievable learning goals? Are they meant for learners to be achieved, or it's just a requirement of the curriculum? What can I do in order to create clear learning achievable goals? And how do I establish them in ways in which they can go step by step achieving such goals? That is authentic. I can't just put 2,000 objectives in the school year because I'm required to, and then just move along these things and whatever happens. Okay? So set clear, achievable goals. And the type of evaluations, the type of instruments. Remember washback. Whatever instrument you're going to be using for your assessment, make it as real as possible. Make learners understand the use and the scope on the use of such instruments, so they're clear on what you expect out of them. These instruments have to be true, real for the evaluations. Make them understand the use of these instruments. It's not the instrument that we need to use, are the instruments that are going to help them learn. Reflect on the process. But be careful. Because when we think about performance, we also think about the challenges of performance. So, is the level, for example, one of the things that we need to consider are the tasks that I'm going to use for my assessment, designed specifically for the language proficiency level of my group. Because I can't have, for example, I can't have learners develop conversation models if they are on the first grade and they're just learning vocabulary. Because that creates cognitive overload. If the level of the task is higher or is more challenging than the level of your learner's English proficiency, there is cognitive overload and the assessment loses the authenticity. Okay? And when the task loses the validity, which we have spoken already of it, then it's not true. We can't rely on an assessment that's either too difficult or too low, or too broad, or include other elements that learners are not aware of. And that happens very often with the tasks. Tasks call for performance, but performance has to be balanced according to English language proficiency and according to content that has been provided in order to avoid cognitive overload and to give clear validity of the instrument. Correct? Perfect. I'm going to take one more minute because we talked about standards here. And one of the things that we've been working lately in Pearson is improving the Common European Framework of Reference. And we have created the Global Scale of English. And as you can see, everybody's familiar to the CEFR, correct? Yes? Bands A1, C1, B2, B2 plus. One of the things that we've done is that in Pearson, we created a different scale, more granular, okay? More specific, so when we create our assessment based on these standards, the path of the bands that is sometimes too broad is narrowed down and the results are more credible. The results are more tangible. So instead of saying, I'm a B2 for 480 hours or 1,000 hours, I can be a 60 or a 62 or a 63, and I still have way to go. I have some other levels to improve, but the fact that every level contains a set of learning objectives that clarify me as a learner with the 4 skills, and also in grammar and vocabulary, help me improve my progress, okay? So we have the Global Scale of English. You can find it here. It's entirely free, and one of the things that we've done is that we have created the CEFR only measured English proficiency levels for adults. We created 5 more frameworks, and the framework comes from the CEFR. We didn't create the GSE in order to compete or substitute the CEFR. We created it with the intention of improving the CEFR. It's been so accepted that even the Council of Europe, the father of the CEFR, is using our learning objectives to improve the CEFR that was already launched in February, last February. So, for example, we have framework for children from 6 to 14 years. We have for professional English. We have for academic English. And we have also a framework of assessment for children and for adults. And everything is correlated, obviously, to the CEFR. So these frameworks are very useful for you now that we've been speaking about performance-based assessment. These 2 frameworks that you can find on this website are free to be downloadable, and you can access it anytime, anywhere. You can download it and use them as a standard for your programs. And it already contains great validity because it's been accepted from the Council of Europe. It's been used for more than 10,000 students. It's been used for people who speak 156 languages, more or less. So it's very ample, okay? So, review time. You were sent, do I still have 2 minutes for the review? Okay. You were sent with some documents and a video. Did you have the chance to see it? Okay, did you read the documents? You forgot the thumbs up. Okay, no problems. All right. What is going to happen is that with the people that is on your row, you are going to have 5 minutes to respond those questions that are connected to the conference and reinforce the knowledge that you have obtained, okay? So take 5 minutes and answer those questions about the content that you received previously. So clock is ticking. Go ahead. Thirty seconds. Time's up. Okay, let's test time for 200 points. The first answer, let's see. Would you say that students work harder when they know they're graded? What happens when they aren't?
They work harder because they have to give a grade. Meanwhile, when they're not graded, they don't have much problem. They're not graded. They're not supervised. I suppose that would be because it happens daily in the classrooms.
Why not? Nice.
I think that we cannot generalize because there are students that they have self-discipline, so there are students that they can work harder even though they are not going to be graded. But of course, it is important to change the system in which the students perceive that the grade is the most important thing in the learning process.
So it's not just about the grade, it's not working for the grade, it's working for the learning. Would you agree on that? Yes? You don't? Okay, here's another no, I love this. I agree to disagree.
I disagree with that because sometimes students are very pressured by parents, and sometimes they have to be working for the parents and not for themselves. So I disagree with this because I said if the kid is conscious of how English is important in their lives, they will work for it. It doesn't matter if they get 100 or not, because some of them are worried for a score, for a number, but some of them are worried how to learn, how to get in contact with other people, either if they travel to another town or not, or if they can communicate with other people in with English speakers in another places.
So let's settle for a balance on grades and learning, right? So we do have to bear with the burden of numbers, as I said at first, but there is much more to do, yes? So we need to balance numbers and performance, right? And how about question number 2? What can a teacher get from formative assessment? What kind of information?
Yes, about weaknesses and strengths of students, because we need to know in the diagnosis test at the beginning of the year, also at the middle and the end, but they know at the end of the year.
Would you all agree? Yes? We obtain valuable information from formative assessment. Yes? Not numbers, formative assessment, performance, communication. That's the ultimate goal, right?
Also, because it's an ongoing reflection, it can be used to quickly adjust teaching and learning, and also it can also help us personalize instruction, and also it can help us determine what is the next step to take.
So it's like doctor's work. Yes? We diagnose, we check the tests, we check everything, and then we propose the solution. Take this medicine, English in pills, you speak in 24 hours. Beautiful. And then we're all out of the jobs. Yes? Okay, question number 3. What are some suggestions given by Dr. Marshall to improve classroom assessment?
Peers assessment, self-assessment, feedback, washback, peers assessment.
Okay, good. You did your homework. Great. Okay, based on Dr. Marshall's finding, why is formative assessment challenging for teachers?
Because teachers are under the pressure to cover the curriculum, and they don't believe in promoting students' independency and independent learning, not just implementing the procedures, and they don't have time to listen to students.
When we base our work only on covering content, which is curriculum, we have to cover the standards, we've got to cover the content, we have to finish the 200 pages of the book. Yes. But that's something that we need to cover and cope with. And when we include formative assessment using the content as a vehicle, things can improve. Okay? So we don't have to dismiss one or the other. We might combine them. Okay, finally, how can a teacher make formative assessment work?
We can do it by promoting independent learning. We can spend more time in focusing on formative assessment rather than the summative assessment, you know.
So we can actually implement different strategies, a concept map. Yes? All sort of graph organizers. They represent understanding. Yes? It's a key. It's a very simple instrument that we can use in the classroom. Okay? It's just one example. Essential questions, follow-up questions, tasks. Instead of answer the questions, create something. When we have learners create things, build things from the content, content obtains validity and use. One of the biggest challenges for us teachers is to cover the content, and the challenge is not only to cover the content, but for learners to make sense out of everything they're learning. Because I have to learn 200 topics in 1 year. They don't make sense out of it, all right? Okay, one more comment and we will move on to the next presentation.
Well, I just want to add that we don't know, we as teachers, we may be prepared for teaching kids, let's say from a specific age, but all these type of assessment, and this is really enriching, but I think that sometimes you need to get prepared for a specific group age. So I will add that because sometimes teachers do not prepare for that, and they think that because they are teachers, they already mastered the class and they know the techniques. But if you're going to teach children, teenagers, it's totally different, and you need to pay attention to the attention span and all those things.
Right. However, the assessment, it has to be unified. Assessment has to be used from preschool all the way to elders, dogs, cats, whatever you're teaching, whatever the age. And you need instruments, you need this formative assessment. Of course, it has to be modified and adapted to the age, right? So that's definitely a very valid point. Time's up for me. I'll see you again in the afternoon. We're going to close with AFL, Assessment for Learning. Now, this is the basis of Assessment for Learning is here. And we're going to do a practice, okay? So continue enjoying. Thank you. I'll see you in the afternoon, all right?
Thank you, Alfieri, Avilán. Now we are going to move upstairs to rooms 3 and 4 to have our second workshop with Master Jorleni Romero.